Welcome back to Talk Show. I'm here with a special guest today, Dr. James Cassanelli, in the flesh and in the digital, all the same. James is a machine learning engineer. Obviously, correct me as I go here if I'm wrong about anything. You have a PhD in planetary science, if I'm correct.
That is correct.
Fantastic. James is an active AI machine learning engineer in the energy space today. And we're here to talk a little bit about AI, LLMs, how things have changed over time. Jim, we're so glad to have you.
Glad to be here. Yep. Thanks for the invite. Quite an honor.
Let's not say anything we can't take back. Just to get things cooking, let's talk a little bit about your background. We got to establish that elite street cred that I know of, but our viewers are not yet familiar. So, first of all, where was your undergrad? What did you study?
I began at University of Connecticut, and that was in hydrogeology or just geology, more or less. So sort of an applied branch of geology, a little bit of geophysics in the mix there as well.
That's really cool. And then
Mhm.
graduate work, where did you go? What was that program?
Graduate-wise, I actually continued on at University of Connecticut while I was there. Had an opportunity to just transition smoothly into a master's program there. So that continued in the same vein, hydrogeology, really, with a bit of geophysics. I did later return to graduate school after a brief stint in the environmental engineering industry. So that was about 3 years, and then went back to graduate school at Brown University for a PhD in planetary science.
Cool. So when you were in the field working hydrogeology stuff, what type of
Mhm.
work were you doing? Just real quick.
So that was, I think, what you would just generally refer to as environmental consulting. And in my particular case, generally speaking, the environmental consulting world is sort of divided into what people would say clean water and dirty water work, where dirty water is more working on remediation projects. So going out to contamination sites, for example, and sampling the water so that remediation plans or monitoring can be accomplished. I was on the clean water side, so doing more water supply projects, things like municipal water supply, going out and setting up water supply tests, so making sure that as new water supply developments are put into place, that they're not negatively impacting surrounding water systems, whether that be wetlands or maybe residential water supplies, things like this. So
That's
that was
incredibly cool.
the world I was in, and which just involved driving around to different sites to install monitoring equipment, monitor the tests, collect the data, and then bring it back to the office to analyze and generate reports for usually for like regulatory bodies.
It seems interesting. It seems like it could also be potentially a long day out in the field.
That's for sure. Yeah, I have a distinct memory of putting on waders and trekking into a swamp in the middle of summer in immense humidity and heat. And I had to carry equipment on both shoulders. So my hands were occupied and I was being consumed by mosquitoes. And I could do nothing about it because I was carrying the equipment and stuck, it's literally just stuck in the mud. That was a rough day.
That is absolutely fascinating. These are things that I did
Yeah.
not even know people had to do as a job. So already learning things. We haven't even gotten to the
Manual
AI and
labor
LLM
mixed
stuff.
into the science there.
Make sure I've got my background correct here. So it was an undergrad slash graduate in geology, hydrogeology, then doctorate in planetary science, and
Yes,
undergrad UConn, Brown for doctorate.
that's correct. Yep.
Okay, so let's talk about what you're actually doing as your day job today. What type of
Sure.
work do you do in your 9 to 5?
So right now, by title, I'm an ML engineer, and it comes with everything it sounds like. Really, the probably the largest component of my day to day just involves developing and training machine learning models for various business problems. Quite varied. I work in a sort of central function capacity, meaning as opposed to being in a particular part of the business, I'm in like the corporate center and can deal with problems in any particular part of the business. So it could be finance or accounting, it could be the actual business itself, or anything really in between. don't know that the group I'm in has handled anything like HR tasks yet, but that's not
Well,
outside of our scope, right? So it could be anything.
I'm sure that's
But
next.
it could be on the horizon. Who knows? I know it's a fairly for me at the organization. It's a fairly new group, so it's still
Cool.
growing, and there are still projects and working relationships that are being established for sure.
That's awesome. And that's actually very familiar. I'll just say a little bit about my day job just to fill in and kind of give a background here. Just who's this interview guy? So, my day to day is SEO. It's also now developed into GEO and AEO. I am absolutely the AI acronym manager at TriNet, which is tons of fun. But basically, I handle search engine optimization, which interestingly enough, happens to overlap very heavily in generative engine optimization, answer engine optimization, and marketing is now aimed at AI, and it's part of almost like an agentic ecosystem. So my day job is also very interesting because I too am now part of a very cross-functional, very new group that's working on accelerating AI usage throughout our organization. My role obviously is generating leads. So we're trying to be as efficient as we can with spend and a whole bunch of other stuff. But it's an exciting time to be in any job. It's an exciting time to have a job and to be dealing with AI, working with AI, learning from AI, and putting it to good use. So if we can get a little specific, and then we're going to talk more about the energy stuff, which is why I have you here, from a development sort of programming perspective, because I know you've been using AI and you've been training LLMs since before your current role. I think I remember you saying you had done some like neural network type of stuff for your doctorate. So I know you've got experience with this stuff before it became your day job. From that kind of development programming perspective, how has your AI usage changed in the past couple of years?
Well, actually, for my education work, I wasn't really making use of AI or ML models directly in that capacity. So I was working more in physical simulation, so developing and running models, numerical models of physical processes, and then trying to derive conclusions or insights from those. The
Cool.
overlap is in the development work. So in those models that were being built as part of my education, I was making use of a lot of the same tools that I do today. So, for example, Python, right? I was building models in Python, numerical models for my education, and now in the working environment, I'm building AI models in utilizing Python as well. It just has become a very popular language, and that is another change that I've seen. I remember in some of my earlier education, I was making use of a GIS tool called ArcGIS, which had a sort of integration of Python.
Hmm.
And that had been the first time I had seen Python. I don't think it was a very popular programming language at the time, but I grew to be acquainted to it to some extent through my work in geology and its integration into ArcGIS. And it has grown into a much more popular and ubiquitous programming language than I remember it being early on. So I was surprised in some ways to see that it's fairly friendly, so maybe that makes sense
Yeah.
as far as programming languages go. Um, but that was pretty fortuitous, honestly. It's entirely possible, I could have been using a different language that may not have been as transferable to the AI or ML space that I'm in now.
That's really interesting. I do also agree with the friendliness of Python because that's one of the few bits of programming I've dabbled in a bit. And there are some really cool AI for like business type of classes out there that also will teach non-programmers specifically how to do things in Python because it's an important part of learning how the AIs work, how the LLMs work. And yeah, very
Yeah,
interesting.
I should say too, for my own work, I will make use of LLMs, but I'm not personally training them. It's
Oh,
a
that's
bit
interesting.
of an undertaking, right? Those models, it's sort of in the name, large language model. So that would entail, at least in some of the cases that people are familiar with, the large language model chatbots, right? You have huge undertakings to build and train those models that are more pertinent to some of the big tech organizations build and offer those models as opposed to smaller companies like mine,
Yeah.
where it doesn't make as much sense to actually build and train one of those models in house, right? We would rather just take a pre-trained model and perhaps do some fine tuning or other modifications to make it useful for our own purposes as opposed to building it from the ground up. So myself personally, as far as what I'll end up working on is more, I think, what you might refer to as traditional AI or ML, using algorithms that were more popular before some of this generative AI came to the mainstream, say with the release of ChatGPT, and solving problems typically more related to like tabular or structured data than natural language processing, like in the case of the large language models. Definitely, there has become the significant focus on the large language models, the generative AI, with the onset of some of these really successful chatbots. So I'm still finding value and applications of the popular AI and ML pre the large language model era.
What's kind of notable about that to me is that there's still a lot of potentially specific use cases all across many industries where they're not just leaning into ChatGPT or something like that. You have your own models, you have your own stuff. You probably have huge amounts of historical data that has been used to train those very specific things, and you couldn't just slide in Claude or Grok or one of these other things to just do that. So very interesting to hear about your specific tools, specific usage, and that there are, again, from a casual observer's perspective, people may not know that there even are other AIs
Mhm.
or other LLMs in existence. So potentially cool. I mean, I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, definitely. I think nowadays it's just become so embedded in the mainstream, this association of AI or ML to the chatbots and the language models, that
Yeah.
for people who aren't necessarily in the space, that's one of the first places that they're thinking is going to go when you say you work on AI or ML or you're using AI or ML. It's just has a lot of, I don't know, gravity. Um, so,
Well
but
phrased.
there is a whole world outside of the
Yeah.
chatbots of
Of ChatGPT.
generative AI. There's also discriminative AI, which is some of the algorithms that I'll make use of would be in that discriminative class of machine learning.
We've done a lot of credibility establishing. We've got a lot about your background, talked a little bit about kind of the day to day stuff. So let's hop into maybe the specifics about energy, or where we can have some specifics about energy. James, how has day to day use of machine learning changed for you or in the energy industry as you've seen it past couple of years?
I mean, the probably the biggest sea change has been the onset of the large language models, in that they've enabled a couple of things. The first is it has changed, I think, the way that ML engineers would go about their day-to-day work. It has for me, and I have to assume that it would be the case for others as well, where, for now, as a good example, you have a tool called GitHub Copilot. It's basically an integrated chatbot interface inside of your IDE that you'd actually be doing development work in. So you have a chat, you can open up a chat with the chatbot inside the same software that you're doing your development, to ask questions, remind you about syntax, things like this, which has been great. And actually, in many ways, I find it to be pretty helpful.
Cool.
That said, it wasn't always. I was surprised to see when some of the early chat models came out. I didn't find them to be as useful for my own purposes as just the standard modes of going to things like Stack Overflow to remind yourself about syntax or try and find answers to questions you may have. Because some of the earlier models often, I think, hallucinated more frequently, or it seemed to be to me,
Yeah.
than some of the more
Scary.
recent models. Some of the more recent models have been really impressive in being able to answer questions that I might pose them about some of the code that I'm working on, and have become significantly more useful. So that has really changed, has quite changed things in terms of just day to day work.
Mm.
As far as AI across the board, I mean, energy is definitely an older industry, and I think in some ways people might say is not as out in front in terms of applying things like AI, but it certainly varies company by company.
Sure.
And I don't actually know that I would agree with that view. Some of the technology in the energy industry is quite sophisticated and has been for a long time. Definitely, the companies are very aware of AI as a trend and are investing to try and make sure they're leveraging it as best as possible for their own businesses. It's an interesting industry because there's a huge range of things you can do within the industry itself. So every company is going to have, for example, generally humongous amounts of equipment. It's a very intensive process to drill wells and extract hydrocarbons from the subsurface, and it requires a lot of machinery and equipment and coordination, and all that machinery and equipment needs to be operated and controlled and maintained. So I think a lot of the traditional AI work that's been done in the industry has been in things like predictive maintenance,
Makes a lot of sense.
making sure that the equipment are being kept up to operate efficiently or controlled in an efficient manner. Now, with the onset of some of the language models, that may all offer new avenues for application of AI in the industry. Definitely, I've seen people making use of it for doing, like, say, development work, but it
Sure.
could be useful for a range of applications that are going to be new and haven't fully taken form yet. So I can see some changes associated with that, and as sort of the generative AI becomes more and more popular. Maybe with I could see probably also applications for some of the image models, which are equally impressive, maybe a little bit less talked about than the chatbots. But yeah, there are applications you can imagine for the use of generative models and creating image type data for various use cases.
Yeah, I mean, based on my experience of like the latest Nano Banana release and it pretty much generating photorealistic humans doing birthday parties and
Yeah,
things, I
it's
have
impressive.
no doubt that when used for good could do amazing things in the energy
Mhm.
industry. So it's really cool to
Or
hear
any
that.
industry, really. I mean, it's
Yeah,
certainly
and
not
the entertainment
unique
industry.
to us. But yeah, I enjoy working in the industry because of the range of problems that are available to work on, and the opportunity to be creative and do different things. We have predictive maintenance we have issues with that need solutions. There are
So if I
optimization
may, really
challenges
quickly, I
to
just
solve.
want to jump on that. When you say predictive maintenance, is that basically like every time you could save a journey for a technician out to the field? Are we talking things like that, or how are you defining that?
Yeah, I mean that absolutely could be part of it. Typically, when I think of predictive maintenance, what I think of is monitoring different types of data that come from a piece of equipment. I don't know, maybe say it's a pump, and you're monitoring things like the pump back pressure or pump temperature, things like this. So you monitor
Cool.
those, and it may be that those data provide a signal that maybe you start to see something in the data before the pump would fail that can be learned by a machine learning algorithm, so that instead of waiting until the pump fails and then having to go replace it, and in the meantime it's just not operational, you
Yep.
may be able
Losing
to
money.
predict when it's going to fail and therefore be prepared to replace it ahead of time, or maybe adjust how it's being operated to extend the lifetime, things like that. So that's what I would generally think of with predictive maintenance. But there's probably other things like you mentioned for sure as well. Best use of your field personnel, pointing them where they're needed for maintenance, as opposed to having them go around and check on things that don't need to be checked on,
Sure.
that
Yeah.
maybe don't
Just
need
running a
maintenance at
schedule.
all.
You also accidentally answered one of the other questions I was going to ask because I was going to ask what's something that people get wrong about AI in energy. And you kind of said the industry is sort of it's been around a long time. So people may
Mm,
not think that AI is being used as effectively or potentially even at the forefront. And you did kind of outline that already. So appreciate that. That was a nice
of course, yeah.
accidental question answering. Very nice. Okay, let's do an industry specific deep cut. James, how does machine learning actually influence decisions like drilling?
Well, drilling wise, there are applications of machine learning that are very similar to some of the predictive maintenance with drilling, right? As you drill, You can collect data and information about how drilling is going on. Similar kinds of things, right? You might collect things like what the RPM of your drill is, or the temperature, other metrics, and perhaps you can optimize your drilling through the use of machine learning to try and maximize something you care about. It could be rate of penetration, how quickly you're drilling. It costs a lot of money to drill wells, so if you can do that more quickly, it reduces the cost. So that's very helpful. Certainly, you can have other issues like a scheduling type of problem where you have only a certain amount of drilling rigs available, and you need to drill certain wells, and you might be able to make use of machine learning or AI to optimize the allocation of those drilling rigs to be a drilling sequence or schedule that is optimized, again, to maximize some kind of parameter that you care about. Optimizing the drilling schedule, one easy thing to optimize in that is to reduce the time it takes a drilling rig to, say, move from one location to the next. So if it almost like a traveling salesman problem that you see often referenced in AI and ML literature. So that would be having a salesman get to all locations of interest with the path of minimum distance between all points. Kind of similar problem with drilling rigs, right? You need to drill certain wells in certain locations, and it takes time and money to move the drill from one place to the next. So you might like to use ML to most efficiently move your drilling rigs to drill all sites while minimizing the actual travel distance of the complete drill fleet.
Since we're talking about drilling, we know that energy can be filled with extreme environments. How often do conditions like that affect your data quality or model reliability?
I'm not as aware of a case where the extreme environments would affect the operation of a piece of equipment such that you have corroded data quality. But it is difficult to collect data just in the first place about some of the places that oil companies operate. A good example is in the Gulf of Mexico or Gulf of America, whatever your preferred nomenclature is. There are large collections of oil to be tapped in the stratigraphy below the surface, and it's challenging to identify where they are. The main tool that's used for that, or one of the main tools that's used for that, is seismic data. But the problem in that environment is you have challenging subsurface conditions. You have a huge amount of water in the way, right?
Yep.
Of course. And then you have the oil residing at depth in the stratigraphy. And I'm trying to think about how to put this in a layman-friendly way. You have challenging stratigraphy that cause issues with the collection and processing of the seismic data. These can be attributable to things like what are called salt diapirs, which is a body of salt that has convected up and created a sort of rising body of salt. And for various reasons, the salt can cause challenges with seismic imaging. It's a fairly extreme environment, great depth, and you have a lot of rock. And you have these interesting structures like salt diapirs that can cause problems in just gathering the data you need to make the decisions, just by the nature of the stratigraphy or the subsurface itself. So getting data about the subsurface is just hard in general. Another good example is when you're trying to make decisions about producing oil from a location. It's in the subsurface, so you don't know much about it. The way that you gather data, you can use seismic, or you can drill wells and collect the data in the well itself. When you collect the data in the well itself, you're only sampling an absolute minuscule portion of the subsurface. So even if you think you know a lot about that well, it doesn't necessarily mean that you know a lot about the subsurface, even if you have many wells, because each well is only sampling a really small volume of the subsurface. And then you have to undergo the process of trying to interpolate between those data points to understand the broader area you're interested in, say, developing. But you still only know just that small amount of information from those locations. So the actual amount of data you have relative to the scale of the area you're trying to understand and develop can be extremely small.
That's absolutely fascinating, and I guarantee our viewers have not heard of salt diapirs before. I absolutely had not. What was that word you used? Stratigraphy?
Stratigraphy, yes.
Stratigraphy. Oh, man. Chef's kiss to that word, stratigraphy. That's like my new favorite word. So when we're talking about
geologists love nomenclature, so
Good.
there's plenty of geology specific jargon.
So anyway, I didn't
Trying
know
to use
anything.
as
Yeah,
possible.
I didn't know about the stratigraphy being so interesting. I also had no idea that bubbles of salt could basically blossom up from underneath our feet, quote unquote. You know what I mean? But really interesting stuff. And that also answers several things, such as strange data sources, extreme environments, and all this other cool stuff.
Mhm.
Well played. I'm also now having like daydreams about that movie, The Core. You remember that, where they made that crazy train that they like dug into the earth with?
I've not
Not
seen
at
that
all
movie,
what you
but I've
do.
seen Armageddon and all manner of geologic travesties of films.
Jump ahead a little bit here. Let's maybe look out the front window. Big vision stuff. So, if you were to predict if there was some sort of AI driven shift in your industry over the next few years, where do you think that's going to happen?
Some of the biggest changes that the industry has seen, people call the shale revolution, which is essentially sort of change of the paradigm in the energy industry in around roughly around 2014, 2015, when energy companies started drilling what we would call unconventional resources. So it is drilling a producing well into a relatively impermeable rock and using fracturing or fracking to increase the production, which has allowed companies to go back into places that were previously undeveloped and drill these kinds of unconventional wells. That has been a really big change in the industry. Prior to that, the industry was more targeting conventional resources, which are comprised of stratigraphy that has higher permeability and are able to flow flow hydrocarbons with less artificial stimulation from the oil companies. I would say though, where I probably see the potential for the biggest change attributable directly to AI that hasn't already taken place could be in evaluating seismic data of conventional resources. The conventional resources have gotten more difficult to identify over time because, of course, just by nature, exploration for oil has taken place over the course of many decades, and
Mm-hmm.
data has gotten better. But a lot of the really big oil fields have already been found, drilled, characterized, and developed. And what remains to be found is getting more and more difficult just because if it were easy to be found, it would have already been found probably and either drilled or known about it at the very least.
Mm-hmm.
So it's getting more difficult to identify and find these conventional resources in some of the places that are already operated in. So it may be that AI or ML could be built to help identify new conventional resources in these locations. That would probably, to my mind, be one of the biggest potential direct impacts of AI in the industry. Again, outside of some of the things it has already affected. The application of AI to do things like optimizing the predictive maintenance and equipment is really impactful. It's maybe not
Flashy.
as definitely not as flashy. And in any individual application, it's a small change it's making, but it's being done on so many pieces of equipment
Yeah.
across so many
Huge
different
scale. Yep.
parts of the operation that the cumulative impact is probably huge, but it just doesn't seem as flashy as you say, yes, as as attention grabbing or whatever.
The industry itself, do you see it moving more towards autonomy, like fully automated drilling rigs, self optimizing pipelines?
I mean, yes, absolutely. I mean, the industry is trying to automate as however is possible. There are probably certain things that you need to consider. Some of our drilling operations are high risk and dangerous. So if you can automate those processes and at least reduce the human exposure to an extent, that could be beneficial from a safety standpoint. Of course, if you can automate certain things, it's helpful from a cost standpoint. But absolutely,
Cool.
from the time that I've been involved in the industry, there has been and continues to be an interest in trying to automate different processes, and there's a massive range of them. I mean, it could be maybe not quite something as significant as autonomous drilling per se, but there can be other pieces of equipment that can be automated. Things like pump controls is an easy example.
Sure.
If
Yep.
the pump sees a certain condition where it needs to be adjusted, instead of having a person on the site manually turning a wheel, it could be an AI model making those adjustments and watching all the, millions of pumps that are installed across the company's assets.
So that's potentially a good transition because we're talking about compliance, risks, protecting the humans, et cetera. So let's talk maybe a little bit about ethics, reality checks. Um, what are the biggest dangers of AI in this industry, either technical, ethical, or other?
Oh, from AI itself, or
I'm asking specific to
like
AI.
the risk of
Yes.
like the risk of AI in the industry?
Yeah. Is what are what are the dangers of AI in this industry?
I can think that definitely health and safety come to mind at least. For example, you have to be quite cautious if you're developing AI to operate machinery where there might be humans in the vicinity of that machinery, and it's possible for malfunctions to occur and therefore perhaps incur injuries for any individuals that are working around or with that equipment. That would be the one that would most immediately come to mind for me. So you have to take special precautions in those kind of circumstances to make sure that that's taken into account.
For new or junior machine learning engineers?
For any new or junior machine learning engineers, I think some of the key things to be doing are keeping up with the technology. It's a very rapidly evolving field, and sometimes it can be breathtaking almost how quickly it advances and how rapidly the technologies change. So it's important to keep up with that as a new and junior machine learning engineer. It will help you keep up, of course, with what's state of the art, and making sure that you are applying the most appropriate technology to any problems that you're working on. And it's not as easy as it sounds because of the rate of advancement that is going on. And it may also help to a degree to focus a bit to try and develop some strengths in a particular domain of AI or ML because it's becoming a pretty broad field with different say subdisciplines, things like generative AI versus discriminative AI, or maybe even something as specific as time series type analysis versus computer vision problems. So developing a particular domain of expertise, I think would be valuable as opposed to having a more shallow but wider breadth. Because if at least if you have an area of expertise, an area of strength, that can start to establish you as a more senior contributor by emphasizing that strength as opposed to trying to learn too much at once. So I think those would be my two main recommendations.
If you weren't doing machine learning in oil, what industry would you jump to next and why?
For me personally, I'm interested in the physical sciences. So anywhere that one can apply AI to physical problems in physical sciences would be of interest to me. If I weren't in the oil industry, I do enjoy where I'm at. I think it's a great blend, personally, of things that I'm interested in. So combines the physical sciences with the machine learning or AI applications, but also in a business setting. And it's hard to find that combination elsewhere. So this is for me personally at least, is a good outlet that allows me to hit a bunch of interests in one place.
James, we're going to do a wrap up here. What's one question you wish people would ask you but never do?
I should have read these beforehand.
Good answer.
People have a lot of preconceived notions about the industry, that are maybe warranted and maybe not. So it's actually, in many ways, a pretty progressive industry, technologically advanced, and more concerned with every company has a PR department, but more concerned with social impacts than I think people give it credit for. And it would be nice for people to take a bit more interest in that. Certainly, the oil companies have developed for themselves a bit of a negative reputation in the population. And some of that may be warranted, but on the other hand, I think it would be nice. It would be nice if people were to ask more about it and show more interest in the industry. You obviously can't. You don't get a chance to explain the state of things if no one's interested to hear because they've only just rely on the reputation that already exists.
Well, James, it has been such a pleasure. Really appreciate you taking the time to talk about cool stuff like AI and machine learning and being in the industry. We will be back next week for some more of our typical talk show format, but it's been a pleasure. James, you're one of our first experts on the show. How does it feel?
It feels good to be an expert, at least, Mike.
On that
That's
note,
what
we'll talk to you next time. Thanks for coming and thanks for watching.